Okay, rulers, settle down. Ruler School is brought to you by Odyssey Games, where you can go to get pre-orders of all the upcoming Force of Will sets, as well as releases of previous sets after they come out. ccgprime.com with over 100,000 Force of Will singles, as well as out-of-print boxes from the past, and TCG accessories, as well as fowlibrary.com, a wonderful resource for deck lists, article discussions, and more. Check them out at fowlibrary.com, as well as these amazing patrons. Special thanks to guest lecturer members Fight Ramen and Shukong Fu. Thank you for your support. Class is in session. Hello there, rulers. Welcome back after a long week of Force of Will to your favorite ever live Force of Will vodcast. It is realizing me that I am super boomy right now. It is Office Hours, featuring myself, Jeremy Franklin, DMO73, and I'm joined, as always, by Paul Reisman. Hello. And filling in for Mike Rance, who's in Vegas, Ryan Miles.
Wait, I could have been in Vegas instead of being here? What am I doing here? Oh, my God. No, I'm happy to be here.
Wow. I see how it is.
As much as I love your podcast, Vegas is really cool, and they should have more forcible tournaments in Vegas. That's what I'm saying, obviously.
Okay,
Jeremy,
fair. I'm trying to adjust this so that you're not, cut off. Yeah, that'll work. It's weird. Discord servers sizing is weird sometimes, but we're all here. We're here to talk about FOW. We are mainly talking about, big topic today is the idea of cheating mana, which I probably heard Ryan Miles say during the last Discord GP about 800 times. So
it's the topic of the day.
It's the topic of the day. But we do have a couple of things to go over. If you like what we do, if you want to consider supporting us, you can go ahead and consider clicking that join button down below. We're almost back up to 100 members, which is a nice little milestone. But regardless, we're here. We're happy to have you. And we do have some things in terms of announcements from the company to go over real quick. First off, we were correct. Praise be that we were right and that it got fixed before the main event, but Tea Party has been fixed. Hooray! Pulling up the image here right now. High res. Dual cluster. Light. Tea Party isn't broken. Yay! It's just very good. Tea Party has essentially been eroded to do what we thought it would do, which is now just combining it all into a single paragraph. So in order to get the ability to put it back in the graveyard, you have to successfully cast the card. This is very good. It makes the card still very good, just not busted. And creates a whole different triangle problem for the next Wanderer meta that we have to figure out. But I would say a less degenerate problem to try to solve, because I don't like infinites, but I guess is my way to phrase that. I'd rather have a meta that has a very good deck that we have to find answers to, rather than has a meta that the problem deck is that it's an infinite. I guess, if that phrases anything. And then we do have a couple of promos that have been shown off. The next Wanderer League promo is Whispers from the Abyss, an old fan favorite for things like the Yigdor OTK, but also just a good draw power card in Dark. Looking very cool, very dark.
Loves it, and that's like a deck that you're allowed to play in Wanderer. I would not blame you for playing it.
Yeah, for sure. And then the Witch of the Fallen Kingdom. There is the Chinese promo version, but for those of us who can't get those or don't want to shell out the money for those, there is this monthly promo version of Witch of the Fallen Kingdom, looking very, very nice. Very, very cool. It does make me think that we might be seeing a loop of the witches. Because last monthly promo that got spoiled was Fire Witch. And now Dark Witch. So then we've gone from normal to super. So the question is, Pointy Hat Witch promo?
That would
maybe
be cool.
Maybe
with this Witch of the Fallen Kingdom is like one of my favorite cards they've made. This art is just gorgeous.
Yeah, this art is very, very nice. Very, very well done. It's certainly something to look out for. I think it's for April, so we should probably start seeing this showing up in events soon. But yeah, we have a lot to talk about tonight, primarily this idea of cheating mana. To give us kind of a foundation of that, Ryan, it is your topic, so why don't you lay out your thesis for us, and then we'll talk about it.
So if you heard me at all in between the rounds of the GP last week, I talked a lot about how in New Frontiers and in Wander, I think that in traditional card game terms, it's called tempo, right? Just being able to spend mana and then have that mana kind of stick to the board is what tempo usually is. But in Forceful, that can get a bit more abstract because there's a lot of things you can do that with like your ruler where you can spend mana and be impactful. But basically, if you're just spending more mana than your opponent, then you're doing more things. And with how many things you can do in the game for one mana right now, like every single will you spend counts. So yeah, the topic is cheating mana, cheating will, talking about how it kind of has shaped the New Frontiers environment. When you look at all of the top decks, Violet, any Carlina X, whether it's Carlina Dante or Carlina Estema, Thief Mooge, obviously for the entire past year, Lycion as a card, all of these things that have become completely dominant in New Frontiers are all about just cheating will and doing things for free or producing will that no other deck could be able to do, right? And then when we look to the Wanderer format and we kind of bring everything full circle to what's looking forward, a lot of those tools actually do get banned in Wanderer. We're losing Lycion, losing Feasting, losing Carlina, but we still have Violet, and we can talk about that, I'm sure. And also, like, what other tools do older rulers bring to the table that are going to influence Wanderer that, you know, fulfill this kind of prophecy of, okay, well, what cheats mana, what can we predict is going to be good just based on that alone, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of the broad view of the topic.
Yeah, and I think the kind of first thought looks of what cheats mana when we think about it, there's a couple of ways to look at that. It's like actually producing mana or cost reduction or alternative costs, right? Those are kind of the big three. And so things that at least I've seen people kind of start looking at as terms of the incarnate mechanic, right? That's a way to be able to cheat mana because it's like I've already committed mana to something and I just have to sacrifice those creatures. So we hear conversations about cards like Adam Brawley, who I'll bring up on the screen just for some of our newer players, or Ryan Miles' favorite card ever, Nyarlathotep, the Usurper. Near and near to that man's heart. You know, so that's one idea in terms of like alternative casting costs. Those kind of fall in line, I think, with the idea of like Lycion. It's this idea of you're choosing a different way. You're not actually having to spend the will, but you're setting yourself up for something where you don't actually have to spend will in order to be able to take those actions. And so those are something to certainly look out for. It's one of the reasons why, like Ryan mentioned, Wolfgang suddenly in Wanderer gets access to every Cthulhu and all of the incarnate packages. So it used to be that the Wolfgang OTK was super fragile because of madness counters, because it had to like constantly be burning through to be able to keep producing will to keep up. But now it doesn't have to do that anymore because it can actually try to push very lethal without going in a route that takes it to madness counters with things like Adam Brawley, with things like the original Shub and Black Goat, things of that nature. So you're going to see something similar to that. Another idea being actual cost reduction, which goes back to Violet, right? I think that's probably the primary way that a lot, that's the easiest way that Violet quote unquote cheats will is by just taking so many actions for zero because of heart-to-heart talk. Because that card is very good, turns out.
Very good.
Let me find it real quick just to put on screen since we're talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even other rulers in Wanderer that will look to abuse specifically heart-to-heart talk. I think Violet is still hilariously the best one doing it, but like there are options. I think Vlad has like an interesting line as a control deck where you can play heart-to-heart talk. You can play multiple heart-to-heart talk, and then you just once per turn drain you for 2, once per turn drain you for 2, and you just play 36 control cards and 4 heart-to-heart talk. That's an option. Arcana of War, the Terror of Scheherazade format, the limit counters, you can just produce a free mana when you have Heart Talk, and
Oh, that's true.
cheating tempo.
That's true. I didn't think about that. Oh God.
I've been thinking about it. I've been tinkering with it. Nothing yet. But sometimes I'm like, all right, Divinity 5, and I get 3 free will a game with Heart to Heart Talk. That's kind of good. I don't know.
0, the King Saber to be able to either pump something up or remove a symbol skill from something free every single turn. No, it's only one void less.
Yeah.
Oh, so it unfortunately doesn't work with her. Duh.
It's only specific guys from the
Specific
past, unfortunately.
does help with original Machina, right? To be able to search out machines faster.
Been messing with that, absolutely.
Yeah, so there's
also,
go ahead.
Dinner Time with Machina too. Dinner Time's another example where it's you're spending 1 mana but then producing 3, and then you can pump that into the judgment effects of older rulers. Trow is definitely getting looked at a lot. Dinner Time Trow decks are all over the place, whether it's Kaguya or just like other random stuff that really wants to also abuse Dinner Time. So yeah, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, for sure. This is another example of the other way to kind of cheat mana as we lose Paul. I'm sure he'll log back in as my face is split in half. Is this idea of you spend will and get will back with a restriction, but then you build around that restriction. Dinner Time has immediately cropped up in almost every single conversation I've been hearing about Wanderer because of that card. Let me pull it up real quick again. Wind. At least initially we thought about it and we're like, oh, that's a neat little Chimimi tech to be able to put out her stuff. And then they were like, oh, wait a minute, you can use it for other things too. So there's some conversations to be had there. What happened to Paul? Message him.
I think we're just kind of lagging. It might be a Discord issue because I can even see my own image kind of slow.
He tells me he's got to go.
Oh, okay.
So me
and you, Jeremy.
Just me and you. We're gonna keep talking about it. Let me shift the screen grabs here then real quick.
Yeah, sure thing.
We'll be invisible.
And
for a
Dinner
minute.
Time.
Yeah.
The conversation at first was like you read the card and you think, oh, okay, I can only use this will to spend on resonators, right? That's what the card says, but because you kind of build it backwards, but really it says you just can't spend it on non-resonators, or you can't play cards that aren't non-resonators. And as Carlina has taught us specifically, there's a lot of ways to spend mana that don't involve playing a card. And I think that Dinner Time is really taking everything that Carlina was abusing and then just putting it into other decks that are doing other things. And I think the ones doing that most efficiently are ones that are already in some way cheating mana, like we've been talking about.
Yeah.
But there is also the opportunity for other shells to have it. I think Mujdart Almerius is very well geared to be a decent control deck just based on the ruler combination, but it's very, very slow. But if you just Dinner Time a Trow on turn 1, suddenly you're kind of in the game as long as you can survive. But you can because you're Almerius, so there's a lot of stuff that you can really do just by building around Dinner Time as alone. So,
and I think that's the biggest thing to kind of talk about here as we look to Wanderer, because like you said, New Frontiers as it stands, there was really 3 decks that were doing this well, right? And it was specifically Thiefmooch because of the Melfi package and Lycion, and then Violet just doing Violet things. I would say Violet's strength isn't necessarily the fact that she can cheat will, but it's more the fact of how many tools she can utilize for that.
Exactly.
It she's
on the weaker end too, right?
She's on
Frontiers. She was kind of lower on, and then she snuck out with Kyron winning this last GP.
It was not necessarily about the thing that made her so good wasn't that she was being will cheaty, but it was the fact of the cards that she was using based off of that will cheating was what gave her so much strength. Especially with Turbulence and setting the stage and Baja, right? and then of course Carlina, right? Just naturally right out the gate having that extra will. And so Feasting's banned, Lycion's banned, Carlina's banned, Six Sage Stone is banned. So that hits a lot of the powerhouses, but the tools are still utilizable. But in Wanderer, they're not just even looking at those 3 decks, right? Violet is the only one of those 3 that's still standing and is still very good in Wanderer, don't get me wrong. But all of those will efficiency tools are now out in the world for everyone to use. And so it's an important thing to think about how does that work in your deck, right? We also have things of a new way of cheating was introduced to the meta in this set, and we started to see it get utilized, but I think in the Wanderer environment you're going to see it utilized a lot more, and it's the card we talked about at the beginning, Tea Party. Right?
Yes.
Force of Will, even up to this point in its history, has always been about, like, the cool thing that it has that no other game has is that before recovery point, right? The actions before recovery.
It is like the I mean, having played Scheherazade and then playing, quick cast Hanzo and like the Kaguya format, like I feel like this has been Force of Will like at its core for a very, very long time. I think like the intro of Force of Will was like, okay, we were allowed to play, one drop Gwyver for a bit. We were playing at sorcery speed, we were playing big guys, but now that answers have become more efficient, the best way to win a game is to try and do something very threatening before your own untap step, and then your opponent has to react to it. They've only got, X amount of mana to spend, and it's the same amount of mana that you have to do threatening things. But then you get to untap, and now you get to use all of those stones to do something threatening again, and your opponent does not have nearly as much. Yeah, they have no interaction, or they let something you did before untap resolve. And that's just like the real threatening point. That's like the point where decisions are made. You have to know what you're allowed to let through pre-untap and know what you have to still counter post-untap. And that's just like... So the way that some decks are going so quickly that on turn 2 they're going to do something threatening, you're only going to have 1 or 2 will to respond, and then it's like, okay, do I let that happen or do I not? And that's the only decision point, because if you stop it, you're not stopping anything post untap.
Yeah,
and like setting the stage is really making that a big, like, really
setting the stage is setting the stage is something that's certainly making that scary, especially in a decks like Violet, but also Tea Party is interesting because it also lets you invest will for the future. Yes, right? Absolutely. So it's this idea of like, okay, I don't really have any actions that I want to take here. I'll toss out a Tea Party, and it essentially, something that Force of Will players always do is like, what if I float will and then recover? It's like, well, you can't do that. Well, Tea Party says, well, you can do that, right? Tea Party's like, well, you can. And so it also bears some interesting things to the meta because of the fact that it gives things that don't have quick cast. It's better than that because they're played as if they have quick cast. They don't actually have quick cast, which means Farer's spell doesn't touch them, which is a very important distinction. This card says you may play your next Resonator this turn as though it had quick cast, but it doesn't actually give it quick cast.
Okay, that's interesting and terrifying.
So suddenly, something's like, oh, I'm playing Odin, and I was like, oh, cool. I played a flute at the end of your turn. I play a Dark Alice, and I'm going to discard a Final Stance. And you're like, well, that's seemingly harmless. And then I go to my turn, and I'm like, cast a Tea Party. And then you're like, okay. I'm like, at the end of your turn, the Tea Party, instant speed, Brunhild, reanimate. I'm going to take 2 turns. And you're like, wait, I need an adult. Wait, I need an adult, please. This is not what I wanted. But like those kinds of lines, are possible because of cards like Tea Party or because of cards that kind of let you cheat mana.
Yeah.
And that's not to necessarily say that decks can't function without it, because we've seen top 8 lists from this past season that have top 8'd without those kinds of things, right? Belial Astemma. That has had some success. Yeah. Belial Dante, right? They, people playing Mooj Dart Almerius in the older format, even with Feasting in the environment, still having some success there. Now, don't get me wrong, most of those rulers were tag rulers for good reason in the New Frontiers format because Six Sage Zone was broken. But like, if you extrapolate it back, like it's the same kind of idea still present in Wanderer, and there's still so much to explore. So it's not to say that you can't be successful without it. And especially at the casual level, go nuts.
Oh yeah, do whatever you want for sure.
Right, there's so many things you can do in casuals, in the Wanderer environment. It's very funny, But the competitive scene, asking yourself as you look at a deck, is there a way for me to cheat mana? Is there a way for me to take additional actions that I normally couldn't? That's how you're going to get your edge. And that's just some important things to kind of recognize, at least for now, because I do think that there are. I know y'all are really hyped about dinner time Trow, but like,
It's
I just don't. You can't do it against a green deck.
yeah, you can't.
You can't. But then you're like, okay, well, what am I gonna do with that anyway? And I'm just like,
so you put dinner time in a deck that already wants dinner time, and then you still just like get to play like 2 or 3 Trow.
Yeah.
Like I think the best dinner time deck right now is just Kaguya, and like if you just go second on Kaguya, it's very difficult for decks to beat Kaguya going second. Like you just don't get to play a card on 1. They get to feasting anything you do. They get to play a Hanzo. But if you like dinner time and then play a Hanzo, like not only are you ramping up your Hanzo, but even if you choose like an X that isn't equal to all the will you're spending, dinner time produces mana for feasting. Dinner time produces mana for Garyon. Dinner time produces mana for Lorite. So like you get to ramp your Hanzo, which will produce you more mana, and then also have all this interaction. But then Trow also searches Lorite and feasting and ramps you stones. It's just like a full package that kind of comes together.
Yeah.
So when I look at dinner time Trow decks, it's like, okay, well, what else are you doing with dinner time? But by the way, you're also allowed to play Trow, and like everyone knows casting Trow is one of the most fun things you can do.
It is.
So like
Trow's a great card. I do love that. I do love that giant.
But yeah, going back to like what makes tempo so important to me is that if you can't keep up with decks that are cheating mana, like they're going to get an action ahead of you, and that action is going to win the game. But there are decks, and I think Dante Belial is a good example, where like Dante Belial isn't cheating mana, but they're gonna let you like resolve an action over them, and then just like Dante use like Belial Goddard to not die. So they'll let that action resolve, but then they won't die because of it, and then they'll have their own really strong combo, like the Inferno Sacred Sword line.
Yeah. Moonlight.
Like
Sword of the
they're
Moonlight.
doing their own broken thing, but they do have a game plan for not losing on tempo alone. But if you try and play like what I had assumed with Odin deck, so I can't use that example anymore. But if you try and play like a like a deck that's not as good or not as fast, like if you want to go back and play Fairer or even like Prisia, and you just want to do a very broken thing on curve, where all of like the tier 1 like gatekeeper decks are really doing something ahead of that standard Callstone curve.
Yeah.
So if you want to not lose to them, you need a game plan to do something more efficient than them, or you just got to find a way to cheat mana so you can your interaction goes tit for tat with their action, and then you can get to your own, strong.
Which is possible, but it is the like the benchmark of what you need to be testing against, right? Which I think
their good hands are going to beat your good hands if you're just playing a normal game, unfortunately.
Right. Alejandro's calling you out. He says the dinner time Trow is a bad play. So
oh yeah, you can't just raw dog it. I do agree with that, but like you still just get to play Trow in the deck.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the thing to note is that I think we have to look at going into Wanderer, going into the competitive environment. I think it's a matter of, like you said, it is the benchmark. It is something you're going to have to know. You need to know your opponent's what tempo your opponent's playing at, which is why I'll throw this hot take out because I think people have disagreed with me, but I still think it's true. I think the current New Frontiers has proven that is that the decks that have proven to have the most competitive success, like event after event after event, not necessarily winning, but like consistently in a top 4, consistently in a top 8, like those kinds of decks, and then to me, the like not succeeding does come down to just like the variance that happens in card games, is the decks that get about a step and a half ahead in tempo and then just like keep it there forever. They're just like, look, I'm not trying to race ahead of you. I'm not trying to like burst you out. If you slip up and give me the chance, I can, but that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to get like this little edge and then just tell you that we don't do that here, and you sit down and shut up for the rest of the game, right? Which is one of the reasons why I think, Astema Carlina was having, so much success. I do think that there was some piloting choices that I wouldn't agree with in these past couple tournaments. That deck is difficult to pilot for sure. I think it's why we saw a shift. I think it's why we saw a shift in the Feasting Moonstart decks to playing this Prisia truly is a toolbox card as opposed to the Prisia trains. Like we saw them go like, oh, I don't need to burst you out, and in fact, I open myself up to vulnerability if I try to burst you out. I'll just stick a Prisia into a Faria, and like we'll chill there for a bit, right? I think we're seeing decks adjust to that. I think that almost, I mean, kudos to Kyron, right, with the way that he built his. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that his list was particularly savantish or different than any other Violet deck, but I do think that he took some lines that you wouldn't naturally think of, and he played in such a way that was very good at keeping the tempo close rather than just trying to race to the finish against a deck that should have out-tempoed him, against a Carlina deck, right? So he played this game of we're going to keep it nice and even, and like maybe get a little bit ahead and kind of hold us there, and then we're going to find our win. Like, say what you will, Force of Will decks that can grind well are still typically the most successful.
Yeah, I think there's like kind of like what you're saying is there's kind of two ways to abuse getting ahead on tempo.
Yeah.
And like the Dante Carlina approach, the Violet approach is get ahead on tempo, and now that I'm able to fight you before and after untap, I just kill you. But then there is the Carlina SM approach. There's like the Control Welser approach. There's these other kind of decks where you're just getting ahead of tempo, and then you stop letting things resolve.
Yeah.
And then you also have, because you're ahead on tempo, you have the time and the extra will to like reload and play cards that draw you cards and stuff like that. So you'll be able to continue to get ahead on resources and just kind of, like you're saying, run them out of the game with just basically having a will advantage alone, that you never let them get to do anything.
Because you don't score points for killing your opponent faster. You just score points for killing your opponent twice in 50 minutes.
Yes.
So it doesn't necessarily.
You do score points for doing it faster if you can't do it in 50
if you
minutes,
can't if you can't do it twice in 50 minutes, at least be able to do it once and then not die for the rest of the time. But yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Is like because the decks that can get a little bit of a head and then just like not let things resolve or not let your opponent reestablish, that's when it's just like your opponent gets into a state of, well, I have to try to answer this, but anything I try to do doesn't work, so then I'm further behind, or my opponent's going to reestablish. Whereas you get to a lot of, we saw in a lot of my testing sessions, I'll speak to the people that I helped test when I was playing the Carlina deck or when I was playing Feithmush deck. It's like, no, I want to sit on like 1,700 damage, 1,800 damage on board, and then just call Stone Pass.
Oh yeah.
Like I don't need to. Like, this is a threatening amount of damage. I am applying pressure, but I'm gonna just let you try to answer it, and if you can't, then 3-turn clock. Here we go, right? Which I think cards like Tea Party. It'll be interesting to me because I think Tea Party can fill a very different role for both of those kinds of decks, right? Because there are certainly a deck where if you want to go pressure, you can use Tea Party as this like invest in to make an early high cost drop that you maybe couldn't do, and go for the pressure route. But there's also a Tea Party route where you're just like, well, I'm just sitting on 3 Tea Parties here, and I've got a handful of dudes. So based on the situation, I'll quick cast in what I need. And so it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of the Wanderer environment. I think that there are cards that a lot of us are looking at as being worthy of a ban when the next ban list happens. And I think a lot of those cards, I think 2 of those cards prevent interaction in the way that Force of Will interaction primarily needs to happen right now, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we don't like them. Yeah. I would argue that Turbulence and Dance of Spirits are both frustrating because they do exactly what you said, Ryan, in the fact of like, they're either answer me now or you can't do anything at all. And the problem with that, as opposed to other things that are like answer me now or don't do anything, is that they are answer me now or don't do anything at any stage of the game.
Yeah, you're basically making the exact same play before and after untap, because you're saying you have to answer this thing I'm going to do right now, or you can't answer it later, right?
Right, exactly. And to people who say Rustin saying Dance and Providence, I'm okay with.
I hate Providence.
I
hate
understand
Providence more than Dance of Spirits right now, but
I
I do want to kind of see
understand.
it, right?
Like I think that Dance of Spirits. I think Providence has inherent like answers to it in the environment, right? Like because it doesn't give your stuff barrier. Like that is
Yeah.
once it's hit field. It doesn't stop me from trying to take actions. It just says I can't cancel you for the turn, which is like
Yeah, but there's
I'm
like
that's
some
fair.
things that the answer is like we have Lorite in the format for a reason, right? Like
Right.
everyone's hated this card for years now, and it's like, no, we need to have Lorite in the format. It's a necessary evil, right?
Right.
But as soon as you introduce setting the stage, all those things that have been getting Lorited for years are now unbeatable. Like there's like once you resolve a setting the stage, there's nothing you can do to stop, an automatic
Abdul.
ability. Yeah. But if like, I mean, think about if like Blue Fox had setting the stage back in the day. It's like, what do you do?
Oh yeah, true.
Only Abdul,
Yeah,
right?
don't get me wrong. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying that a card like Providence can't be examined in the future, right? That I think because that's another point that we'll talk about here in a little bit because I'm curious to hear your thoughts and the chat's thoughts. But like these are cards. The three cards that I'm talking about are Prisia, Turbulence, and Dance of Spirits are like the three, right? They're not necessarily cards that need an E-ban right now because there are decks that don't need them that can have success. There are necessarily decks that can answer the decks using those that can have success, but it's cards where it's like, yeah, that could probably go. And I think Dance of Spirits and Turbulence for the things that we kind of say. I also think Turbulence has a little bit additional because it's also like 3 cards in one.
Yeah, and that's honestly like better for Violet, which is
right.
the really annoying part.
Right. Like Turbulence is better than setting the stage because it's the silence, but also it's a discard speed up, but also it's burn. So it's like, wait a minute. Like,
a lot.
like if you gave Violet just setting the stage, I'd be like, yep, okay, that's fine. She can have setting the stage.
I would love to see Violet just play Dance of Spirits, right? Because then, okay, it costs 2 mana first of all, and like I can interact with that a lot easier than Turbulence. But also, you're not dumping 3 atoms into the grave for your Baja on turn 2,
right?
So I can have a lot more time to interact with that. But yeah, Turbulence itself is really kind of pushing the deck over the edge for me. Where I think like the stuff we have talked about, where Violet is just like doing a lot of free things that really shouldn't be free, and then drawing a lot of free cards where it really doesn't need to draw cards even. And like all of that is still fine in like the Wanderer, like in general, because like the cards are very specific. Like you've got this utility cool box, but the deck is really cool and very interesting. When I get turbed into a Baja on turn 2, I'm like, what are you like? What do you do? It feels just as bad as just like playing against Kaguya going second, where it's like, if I play a card, I get Feath Singed, and if I don't play a card, they might just play Feath Sing, and then they just go Hanzo anyway. Like, it just gets kind of ridiculous.
Right, for sure. There's certainly, so those cards are things that we kind of consider. And again, that we have decks that exist that can counter these, but then it becomes like, well, are they good enough to beat the other things? And then we get into a triangle format and blah, blah, blah. But like when you get into a triangle format based on how big the points of the triangle are, that's where you can start to look at like, maybe we need to ban something. So because like if the triangle is 17 decks, single ruler, then it's like, okay, maybe we need to look at these 2 points of the triangle and maybe change some things.
It's no longer a triangle, it's just a line, and then like there's an audience sitting by waiting for one of those guys to disappear.
Yeah, for sure. So but like to that point, and like Prisia is quote unquote cheating mana purely because she's a toolbox card and like she's altar on a stick, but she's also altar on a stick that also lets you sack your deck. So like it's a similar kind of thing. You're technically taking actions, but like she's free in the sense that she's always coming back to hand.
Party, right?
Yeah, she's like always coming back to hand. Yeah, especially since the card always comes back to hand. Like that's like in my opinion, if the Prisia Seeker of Friends didn't or had like maybe an awakening cost to kick it back to your hand, fine. Like fine. But like because it's part of the resolution, it's going to come back to your hand, blah, blah, blah. It creates a situation like Tea Party, but it's almost better than Tea Party because of the fact that it's constantly stacking the deck too. Tea Party doesn't do anything on resolution. It's literally just late. It's just later on. This is going to turn into a will and a card, for sure. So
I'm kind of on the fence about Prisia. Like I definitely thought coming into Wanderer testing that I would be very happy about it, and I was like mostly focused on Welsar, obviously, because that's the way that you make Prisia's cost to play not as high because you're untapping a stone every time. You really get to play a reactive game while stacking your Prisia. But like the faster decks like don't let you get time to stack your Prisia. I feel like.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's more of just like it again, which is why I don't think it's an e-bannable card. I don't think it requires an e-ban. It's more of a like for the sake of
it as a bannable card because it is. It's just
yes.
like it's. I don't feel it right now, but I know that if you
future-proofing nightmare, future-proofing nightmare. That card.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's something that we've kind of talked about, and I think that's when we talk about these cards, you can talk about, oh well, this card's so great because X, Y, and Z reasons, and da 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 da. Oh, this great is because we cheat will, like again, even earlier today we said Trow dinner time, right, or dinner time Trow, and Alejandro's immediately like, no, trash, get out of here. But
he doesn't want to take Gary on a fair spell. He's
just like
he's right, but like it's still good. You still play it in Kaguya. Like,
yeah, for sure. Yeah. But so it'll be interesting. These are just things that are important to be considerate of, because and I do think that this topic is a core element of what separates old FOW from new FOW.
Oh, for sure.
Like old FOW. Cheating mana was mana dorks.
Yep.
That was the only
Brawley.
That was or Adam Brawley. Like that was it. Or like Incarnate, right? Those were like, those things.
Gwyber was kind of cheating mana because you weren't playing 1 mana 12/12s like by themselves, right? Like you had to do this cute setup to like be efficient. Like your Gwyber was essentially cheating mana because he had the stat line of like a 3-drop, right?
Right.
Or even more than that usually.
Right.
So yeah.
But new FOW, shifted a lot more of the action to the pre-recovery phase, shifted things to be able to, we've had the creation of investment mana, of investing mana now to have it pay off later or be able to spend it later, those kinds of things. And so it does provide, a different perspective, a different, what things to consider in your deck building. Not that's inherently bad. Just that like, we've had this conversation a lot on the channel of what is the difference between old FOW and new FOW? And I think that this conversation, this idea of tempo and how tempo is generated, and how many different ways we've had to be able to generate tempo / cheat will, has certainly led to that. Because what was back in the old days, right? The clearest example of cheating will was turn 1 Sacred Elf, turn 1 Elvish Priest into turn 2 Telefairy Tale.
Way back then. Yeah,
way back then. That was like our first idea.
That was before me even.
Yeah, that was like our
Muhammad,
our first idea, and then like from there we went to there wasn't really a lot of cheating mana beyond that, or it was things like the castle that like eventually this would invest and turn into 2 dudes, or stuff like that. And now we've gotten to this point of like mana dorks are more of a liability now, and that's why Flute is so good, because Flute's not a liability, right? Like Flute's like, I got barrier, we good.
That's why Mono White Lumi is good.
That's why Mono's like
White Mana Dork has barrier, and then SGD will,
yeah, for sure. So there are still ways to do it. There are still ways that so ramp war, woo. I remember the days of call stone, play elf, next turn call stone, play elf. You've done it. You have a lot of will. Congratulations.
Even as far back as like Worlds 2016, where the entire format was Sacred Elf, Melfi, 5-drop on 3, right?
Yeah, Sacred Elf, Melfi, 5-drop on 3. That's what we're going for, right?
Yeah.
Just trying to speed ahead. And so it's important to recognize what those cards are. It's important to recognize if you're not going to play those cards, you need to do what it takes to be able to keep up with them or punish them. Like he was saying with, with Dante Belial, like when they go to cast dinner time, you're like, cool, you're very clearly going to do something this turn. God art. Like before you have that extra will,
I will not die, and then on my turn I will kill you.
Right, exactly. It's just like, great. You have to be able to know those lines, and we've talked about this before on the channel too, of like understanding what is what the prominent themes are in the meta, what the prominent strategies are in the meta, and then building to be able to either do them or counter them is how you find competitive success. And I think that Wanderer is no different. I think the things that have changed is that there has been a big shift, I think, and Ryan, I'll put this out to you. There's this big shift of, in the previous format, in the previous New Frontiers, current New Frontiers, cheating mana has come from the ruler for the most part.
New Frontiers, absolutely.
Yeah, New Frontiers. In Wanderer, that is not at all the case. Like, cheating always comes from the main deck. Outside of Violet, but like again, she's doing the same kind of thing that she was already doing. It's not true cheating, but it kind of is because heart-to-heart talk.
It's very efficient. So like I consider it like a very fast deck, and like it can keep up with the deck's literally cheating will because like the stuff that it's doing is so cheap and efficient.
Yeah, for sure. But like that's an important thing to recognize is in your deck building if you're trying to be someone who's building the deck, and also things to play against is. The problem that we had with people's frustrations with Carlina X and Feasting Moojdart X, Feasting Moojdart, was Feasting Moojdart practically always had the Melfi on one because of their mulligan, right? So there was this consistency that Feasting always started with this, right? And it was the problem with Carlina was Carlina has a lot of different openers, but she only cares which opener she finds because she herself will always have the will to do it. In this format, we don't have any of that. Decks, it'll be interesting to me. I think that's the big thing that I'm most curious about as we see people deck build, as we see people do testing for the meta, is how much we see stumbling because of how much of their deck they try to commit to like cheesing as opposed to like core good fundamentals, because I think we have seen decks in the past that have tried to cheese and then stumble to hell and then they don't have a backup plan, and then they're just like, I had a really bad luck day, so this competitive tier 1 deck went 2-5 because my hands were trash.
Maybe I should preface this by saying that a lot of the Wanderer I've been watching has been Kyron playing
Violet,
every possible Violet deck, right? And then it's Derek who likes playing any deck with Dark Alice in it, and then Eris who just doesn't like playing good decks, I guess. And I also like made her play Kaguya, but yeah, like it. Like the stuff that they brew gets very stumbly and like can have really high highs where like you're just doing something degenerate. It's like, oh, that's what the deck does, and then that happens 1 in 4 games, and you're like, that's not a very good deck.
Yeah,
and like I think the main conversation I want to talk about, like with the takeaway here, is like Wanderer is very wide open, and I would not. I would not be surprised if I was surprised by what tops this Wanderer event.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just like whatever you're building, that's going to be whatever brew you have going on, whatever ideas you're thinking of. Like, there's a lot of room to play, but like you just have to know that the common enemy of like the decks that are going to be good, that are going to be popular, that are going to be succeeding the most, are going to be producing that extra will, producing that extra tempo, and just doing things super efficiently.
Jalen,
so
hi.
You have a game plan to beat that. You can get into top 8 with almost anything. It's just, what does that game plan look like, and is it viable compared to what's going on?
Hi, Jalen Rojas. Good to see you, buddy.
Hi, Jalen.
Good to see you. Yeah, so like I'm gonna throw you under the bus a little bit here, Ryan.
Feel free.
So earlier today, this is a great conversation. Earlier today, I'm talking to Ryan.
This is a good example. Yeah.
I'm talking with Ryan. And we're talking about, he was like, how's Wanderer testing going? How's it going? Everything else. And I've never known Ryan to pilot a Violet deck. I've never seen this man pilot a Violet deck. I've never, seen him try testing hands with a Violet deck. And he goes, I'm pretty sure I'm just on Violet for the event. I'm like, oh, okay, let's have a conversation about it. We go through all these pieces and he talks about these things that are good. And I'm like, yeah, doesn't Odin just like really hurt this? He's like, what do you mean? Well, Sword's a card. Like, Divine Sword of Mistletoe makes it so you can't ever be Turbo Bahad, and literally...
I read that card when he said that.
Literally, Violet has no out to this card. We have Keep the Faith, which is insane. We have Mistletoe, who can't take damage. You're in white, which is, like, the best, like, responsive color right now because all of its responses are super low. And you also, like, can play Lorite, can play Dark Alice, can play Tea Party. And he's like, Okay. And then he goes silent for an hour. No responses to me for an hour. And then he comes back and says, sorry, I went offline for a bit. I've spent the entire past hour in the database. What were we talking about? Oh, that I was playing Odin for the event, and I always have been. Like, I think your direct. I think your direct quote. Let me read this direct quote from you. Let's see. But I sent a bunch of deck lists. What were we talking about? Was it about how I'm playing Odin for the event and always have been? Like,
yeah, Violet. Who's Violet?
Who's Violet? No, but like I think this is one of the things that we're trying to talk about is I think it's very easy when you make the transition from New Frontiers to Wanderer to get pigeonholed based on what we've seen before. But I think it comes down to, again, like the analysis of what we've done for Violet here of like, she is cheating Will, but like, how is she doing it? Like, it's important to recognize how decks are cheating Will, because the deck builds for those are going to be very different. And usually they either are very risky because they'll stumble because they need too many main deck pieces, or they're not really cheating Will, they're just being really efficient. And then at that point in time, there are punishes that you can consider, or, how do you, bypass their game plan or disrupt it, right? Once you learn it a little bit. And the card pool for Wanderer is gigantic.
Yeah. One thing I was going to be talking about earlier today is, in fact, that I think white has very quietly taken Darkness's place as the second best color in Wanderer. There are just so many white tools. And like what you were talking about earlier with how Odin kind of beats Violet, and I just didn't see that. It's doing the same thing that Dante Belial is doing, where it's just having this interaction where it doesn't care that Violet gets ahead on tempo, because you say, oh, I'm only taking 1,000 damage a turn. Do whatever you want while I catch up to you, and then I'm going to do some powerful things that'll let me not ever actually lose the game.
Yeah.
And as long as Odin has legs against other stuff, and like I actually think it could be real, and like because it's in such a good color where it is white, and I just haven't explored like what a good white deck looks like yet. It's kind of been mono white Lumia with like some green white Kaguya stuff going on, but Kaguya has a lot of dedicated space to specifically Kaguya cards, right?
Dark Sun.
Yeah, Dark Sun just beats Kaguya. So now you've got Sword to beat Violet, Dark Sun to beat Kaguya, and I'm like,
wait a minute.
Okay, we got to look at the other.
We gotta look at it.
Like, you're beating two decks. I don't think I could name another deck that beats both of them right now off the top of my head. So in theory, everything's looking good for Odin, but don't
gotta test it, right? You gotta test it.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
But I think that's the thing of Wanderer right now is, especially as we lead into this event with this current ban list, current Tea Party errata, is like the meta is not nearly as solved. The boogeyman of the format, I would argue that Charlie has done a really good job with his tier list on his video, talking about what the boogeymen are to beat. And even considering, again, let's talk about like IU versus Odin. Odin just has the same game plan that he had with Violet. It's like, okay, cool, you can make your IU huge, she still only deals 10.
Yeah. But then she resuscitating Wills and deals 10 again.
Oh my gosh, still half my life. Oh, right. And then, so it's, and Odin's like, hey, by the way, Wind of Asgard is free for me, but not for you. So like stuff can stay alive from being targeted and blah, 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 blah. There's like lots of different things that you can do. So like, the format, the argument is find out how decks are cheating Will. Find out if you're a deck that wants to cheat Will, or if so, how. And then just like throw ideas at the wall, because there's a lot of unexplored stuff. And Wanderer is significantly more open than it seems. If you look at Charlie's video, he puts in his tier list, he usually says B and up is anything that could top 8 a GP. And like his B tier is like very large. So there's a lot of variety there, and that's just like Charlie's first ideas, right? He even says it in the video himself. It's like, this is my initial thoughts. So if you're trying to get competitive, don't give up, because there's a lot more to this than it seems, and a lot of different options it seems, of ways that you can take old school FOW decks and bring them into new FOW era, and this probably be successful, right? There's also a lot of old cards that are still very good, and if you're playing casually, have fun.
Absolutely.
Because you can do a lot of really stupid stuff. A
Even
lot.
competitively, you can do a lot of stupid
That's
stuff.
true. That's true.
Oh
But you
boy.
can do like, but you could do a lot more like even stupider stuff
Oh
in
yeah, for
like
sure, for
when you're
sure.
just like, I'm goofing around and I'm gonna do this 17-piece chain combo where I take infinite turns off of a final stance in a Dark Alice, and you're like, I mean, I guess if that's what you want to do, like,
Who told you about my Welser deck? What are you?
who told you?
Who
Yeah,
told you?
Alejandro's like, I could name two, but I agree, Odin is wonderful. Yeah,
Alejandro knows every deck that ever existed in Force of Will
in
and
what?
every deck that will exist in the next 6 months, and he's built them and played them 40 games. I don't know how he has this much time, but this man is a Wanderer phenom.
Yeah, yeah. Wanda,
Ludicrous.
he says maybe, just maybe, there is another tier list video, but with actual deck lists in the upcoming weeks
Oh,
from
that would be
another
nice.
source. That'd be dope. That'd be
I
dope.
love the Seven Kings tier lists, even though
Oh
they
yeah,
were all in Spanish. I didn't
yeah,
understand them. It's like deck lists, content, Google
yes.
Translate. Tell me what I need,
Tell me
please.
what I
I don't
need to
have
know.
time to play this many games to find these lists. So if
Yeah,
we got one of those coming out, that'd be hype.
yeah, it's gonna be great. I found myself this week, like for the first time, because I've been doing New Frontiers content for the channel for forever, right?
Forever,
It's
yeah.
what my locals is. It's what has been the environment. It's what has been, my locals environment. It's what is the primary, source of the content. Like I found myself this week being like, man, I wish I could be playing Wanderer. Like, I found myself being like, do we transition the channel to Wanderer just now? Because there's just so many fun things that I want to do. But then, and I was like, I could still build like Wanderer decks for the new rulers as they come out to show out their new cards. Like, I can do that. That's fine. And then I even like asked my locals, like, hey, yo, Wanderer. And they were like, nah, August. I was like, that's fair. Understandable. Have a nice day.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are waiting for that like new pack, the reprint pack that they're talking about,
Yeah.
where it makes the game accessible for everyone. So I can understand that.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of, I think our current plans for Ruler School is to try to buy, if it's a Vingolf style product, I think our plan is to buy specifically for the channel, to buy 2 cases of it.
Oh God.
On top of what we get for ourselves, so that we just always have like an easy way for like newer players who message us on YouTube or newer players that are locals to be able to like pick it up, where we're gonna sell it to you at cost, like, because this is a product that
Play the game.
this is a product of like, it's going to be super important, and I get the vibe from the company that they know that it's going to be super important, so the hope is that the print run is very large. I mean, we're still seeing right now that like Game of 7th, ADW, Game of Gods 1 and 2 are still pretty available, which is nice. Like, clearly print runs have increased, so hopefully with the Wanderer reprint that's happened. But that does bring us to my final point here. Please make them print a foil Pumpkin Witch. Pumpkin Witch is foil, right? Isn't there a foil version?
I don't think
Maybe
so.
not. Maybe I'm just...
Yeah, they weren't printing foils back then. They never reprinted her because
Yeah,
why would they?
that rarity never got a
Yeah.
playset for the channel, playset for Jeremy, playset for Paul. Piece of cake. So I do want to say, I want to hear your thoughts, Ryan. With this shift to Wanderer, with we've had 3 ban list updates in the span of the past year and a half that have all been pretty like influential ban list up. First off, like the ban list, like it finally got really expanded, and that was really huge. And then we saw the Feasting ban, and then we saw or Feasting and Carlina, right? Or Feasting was banned, and then Carlina was
Carlina and Lycion, or Feasting and Lycion got banned.
Feasting and Lycion got banned, and then Carlina got banned, and then Six Sage Stone got banned.
Electo got banned at the same time.
Yes, and then
Oh,
Six
yes,
Sage, and then Six Sage Stone got banned, and Spinning Myths came off. And then also, even before this event, we've now seen the Tea Party fix.
Yep.
So I'm curious into if you have any thoughts about what shift in perspective, or like what thoughts you have about the company's seeming position on Wanderer nowadays versus like way back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think like with the announcement of the August shift to Wander, I think they're just trying to make it as competitive a format as possible. And I think in doing that, they're listening a lot. They're looking at tournament results, looking and listening to the players who are playing Wander, which I think is very large in especially the Spanish community. So I think that just like the company being willing to listen to the players more directly, which is something that they kind of did last time we had like Jeff Finnegan on the board and was like reaching out to players about like, Otherworld Dreams and stuff like that. Like when there's with this broken of a format, really, you can't just let everything run wild. And that was kind of like what I talked about earlier this week on the Facebook post. Like, hey, if there was no ban list, could you kill someone on turn 0? You can. So you kind of do want
Adam Brawley. Hey, like, it all comes back to Adam Brawley.
Like there are just things that are way more broken than other things. And instead of just letting it all run loose, it's more fun. You get to make more decisions. You get to have more action happening if you just tame it down. So I really love what they've done so far with every ban list. I think there's like some cards that don't need to be on the ban list, but just kind of are. But it really doesn't matter. I think that this event is going to be really cool. And I think that the ban list will only get better from here.
Yes.
And I think that with new cards coming out, they'll be my one hope is that as they come out with new cards, they ban a bit more proactively. Like I don't think they're going to print anything that would need to be automatically banned, but they might print something where it's like, hey, now please ban this that shouldn't exist because it's a broken interaction, right?
Yeah, and I think to me, the biggest shift the thing that gives me the most hope is because I think there's 3 elements of this transition that I think are like super important, and I think it's accessibility of new cards, right? Accessibility of new cards, a willingness, keeping the ban list generally updated, and a willingness to listen and listen to things, to statements about new cards and consider them. Because in the past, I think, again, this is me with pure speculation, just from like the trends and everything else. I genuinely think that there was this element of the reason why we don't ban stuff out of New Frontiers is because it's just going to rotate. So eventually it'll just go away, and while I can't point to an email and say, this is the perspective of the company, because I don't have that for that kind of thing. It's what it kind of always felt like to me, was just like, oh, well, it's going to be fine. It'll rotate out, everything else. But what I've seen here, I think the biggest indicator is, to hit those 3 points, is accessibility of new cards. In the announcement, they said, hey, not only are we going to be doing this supplemental product, but new sets moving forward are going to be more considerate of older rulers, and stuff like that. Okay, great. That's automatically a shift in product design. It hits that piece really well. The communication about the ban list. They have done these massive overhauls and have been communicative of new ban list every set. They've recommitted to that verbally. The new ban list for Wanderer every single set release. Awesome. Great. So we've got a schedule that's on routine. We don't have to go like, are they going to ban it? Like, we know when bans will happen. And third, so that hits that point. And third, willingness to look at new cards. Feasting and Carlina have been in standard for less than a year.
Yep.
They've both been in standard for less than a year and are rulers. Like, hard things to get the company in old perspective to even take a look at.
Remember Reflector Fane for
right, right. They eroded it, and then it got banned eventually. Scheherazade.
They rotated the whole format.
Right, they rotated the whole format, and then banned it. Yeah. And then eventually it got banned. Scheherazade, they took a bunch of her other cards away, and then finally banned her. Right, but this is 2 rulers that within less than a year were banned out of the Eternal format before they even got the time to shine at the Eternal format. So Lycion also gone. That's a new recent card. They within I want to say from the time that it started getting mentioned in the communities to the time that we got oh hey, something's being fixed about it for Tea Party was like a week and a half.
Yep.
Like the turnaround time on that, and it's like this is a card that's been out for like less than a month.
I think my favorite part about all of this is like watching like just MTG players on Twitter where they complain about like this Aluris card that it came out and then it got like errated like a month and a half later or longer to like remove the companion mechanic, and it just ran a train on Eternal formats for like 2 years now before it finally got banned. And I'm like, hey, nice game. Have you guys tried Force Wheel, by the way?
Yeah.
We just do it better.
Yeah, like, so there's this, to me, those 3 points that I talked about, the actions that have been taken recently by the company give me a lot of hope, like a lot of positive about that, because there's clearly been some kind of shift for the way better
This is the direction they want to take in the future, and they're really committing to it.
Right, yeah, and that to me is the big thing. Is it is a very, in my opinion, it's a very clear indication of the direction they want to take in terms of managing this format, right? This is not to speak of, did we need to do this? This is not to speak of, could we have done it different? Could we have done the shift differently? Like, that's a whole nother conversation. In terms of pure, like, commitment and seemingly perspective about what the format's going to be like, I see nothing but positives. At least willing to be positive and hopeful about it. Looking at some questions here. No new ban list every set. That's nutty. I think it's the same perspective that happened back when Jeff was around. Was they committed to a new ban list every set, even if nothing changed? So like, it's this idea of saying the new ban list effective. The next one's in May, right? They would say like the new ban list updated as of May, based on current details. No new cards have been added to the ban list. No new cards have been removed from the ban list, but it has now been updated, right? And that to me is fine. You can have, based on the health of the format, you can have a ban list that doesn't need to be changed. But there's a difference between saying, we're just going to stay quiet on it, as to, hey, we're making an announcement. This is the most up-to-date version, effective this day. Biggest concern, Clefadunk. Fairly recent Marvel rares. Some are already gone off the market, like Suya. Hope they aren't too resistant to reprinting even high rarity stuff. I don't think they are resistant. I mean, like, which of the Fallen Kingdom is a super rare that currently sits on the market full art for like $25? Like, and non-full arts are still going for like 15. That it's not even a year old and already has a monthly promo, right? So like, even with what they're doing from that way, like, they're showing a perspective of like card access. The idea of card access to me has certainly become a more present thought in company decisions, like, very clearly in my mind. So for those kind of things. So I would expect that maybe we might just see stuff like Suya, pop up. Would have rather seen these as the tournament promos, but I gotta say the duets are beautiful and excuse it for being a theme. Oh yeah, for the entry participation promos. The duets are cool. I should try and let community members spot the top Marvels early and make them tourney promos or buy a box promos after the feedback. There may be some misses, but it would be a cool preemptive way. It's a good idea too. I would think that our monthly promos do tend to be like pretty popular cards, pretty successful cards. Usually, yeah, if you look at like New Front, I mean, some of them are hit and miss, but like some of them are really good.
They're a lot more hit now than they used to be, right?
Yes, for sure. A lot more hit now than they used to be. Fire Witch is still a card that sees some sideboard play and might see some more based on what the side, burn decks are. You talk about Surging Lightning. You talk about a deck that can cheat Will. Like, hey,
Olivia.
how do you feel about turn 0 having a free blue Will? Oh, wait a minute. That's pretty good.
We've talked about it. Listen, Wander is all over the place.
Right.
If you can beat just one Will, it's worth it.
Yeah, right. Black Witch. We've seen Lorites for the Wander. Because also now every Wanderer League promo is just a promo.
Yeah.
Dispelling Stone, Loki's Insight, Fit Lorite, Last Secret Sword, Look of Corruption. Like these are good cards that we are seeing in the promo arena. So I'm just excited to play the game again. Heck yeah, we're excited to keep playing it.
I'm excited.
How about they overhaul the promo distribution too? Todd, we've talked about that. I don't have any. I get what you're saying. I'll continue to raise the feedback as it's been provided. I do think a lot of that does come down to the distributors. I think that there are some distributors who are better than others. But we've had that conversation before. I get it. Feedback continues to be raised as I can for you, bud. Yeah. The new Wanderer promos are really solid, Alejandro. So, to that end, I think we're going to call it for tonight. This has been a wonderful conversation. Ryan, thank you so much for coming up with this topic tonight and for joining us to chat about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking about very streamlined, niche, competitive, absolute top 1% edge cases.
Yeah, for sure. That's what we love
And
to.
forcing you to talk about them too.
Yeah, I'll do it all the. I'll talk about foul all day. But that is it for us tonight. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, if you want to consider supporting the channel, click that link in the description or the join button down below to join the channel as a member. I will say, I'll tease it here a little bit, that we are planning an event for November. I don't have a date yet. FowFest 2 is officially happening. Like, we are going to do that. It is going to be well worth your time to travel to. If you haven't already seen our posts, we're talking about different entry tiers where, like, at the base you get a bunch of promos. At the second tier you get a random textless dual stone, like, just for showing up. And then at an even higher tier you can get a top 8 gold Uber just for showing up, and like bonus pricing all the way down to like top 64 with like acrylic and metal and prize cards and more Ubers and all kinds of stuff and cash and playmats and everything else. We're going big for FowFest 2, so start thinking about early November as like a time when you might want to travel. Just saying. More information will come for that soon. But until next time, this has been myself, DMO73, and I have been joined by the lovely Ryan Miles. And we are saying class dismissed. Have a good night, everybody.